So my name is Avinash. I've been with Microsoft just over 3 months. But I come from a security background. So I worked at Symantec, where I spent 10 years doing security. And so today I'll talk about how Microsoft can help customers like yourself improve their security posture. And more importantly, how you can be able to have better defenses and how you can better detect what's happening out there in your networks. I'm sure you've seen statistics from various security vendors about data leakage, time to detect an attack, and the cost of the attack. But the key thing here is, there are two types of organizations, as we like to put it, right? One that know that they've been breached, and the other that they don't know, right? And if you look at the time to detect today, it's about 145 days, right? So that's 5 months that the hacker is in your network, a thief is in your house, and you don't know he's there. So it's just, the longer time he's there, the more damage he does, and the more risk your organization is at more risk. How much time does it take for an attacker, once he's inside your network, to get admin access? Any guesses? How long does it take for a hacker to get admin access once he's inside your network? Throw me some numbers. Days, months, hours? Sorry? Minutes? Probably. So it takes roughly about under 24 hours before he gets admin access, right? So once he's in there, he can basically do anything and everything that he wants in the organization. So how do hackers look at your network, right? As I was saying earlier on, hackers are very smart, they're very educated people. They know exactly what type of technologies you've deployed, and they also know how to work around those technologies, right? So if you've got signature-based technologies, he just needs to create a very targeted email with a payload that will not get detected at a signature level, right? So that's the reason why you use advanced persistent tools or threat detection tools which do sandboxing and stuff like that. But that again relies on certain, how it gets detonated, how it behaves in the detonation chamber, and there will still be things that will slip through and go to the endpoint. So that's the other challenge there. So if you look at the hacking community, they are very, very well organized. They've got lots of people behind them to help support them, right? Unlike IT organizations where you have 1 or 2 people looking at security, they've got tons and tons of information as well as lots of people to support them as well. So if you look at the bad guys, who are these bad guys really, right? So number one, these could be groups of people like Anonymous who will go after organizations or countries, and we've seen this happen across the region. Singapore was attacked by Anonymous as well. So again, it's organized crime, group of individuals, crowdsourcing, come in and go after the organization. The second one is nation states, right? South Korea, North Korea, classic examples. North is always after the South Korean. But in this region, because of the South China Sea, we've seen a lot of attacks happening recently as well. So whenever there are tensions, whenever there are some announcements that happen, we see an increased level of attacks coming through as well. And then, of course, the people who also rent out botnets for hire. So if I'm an attacker and I want to, launch an attack, I don't need to go and build my own botnet. I just can go up and subscribe to a botnet as a service in the cloud and then, rent it for whatever amount of time I want to do it. So that's another example. One of the things Microsoft does, and I think Keshav later will touch about, is we go out and disrupt these botnets. So we work with law enforcement and other organizations to go out and remove these botnets so that we can minimize risk to organizations as well. So net, if you look at threats, they come from in all sizes and forms. Every organization is at risk, and we always recommend organizations to have a posture of what we call as assume breach, right? Assume you've been breached, and then you put in all the plans and procedures needed to mitigate against that breach. A lot of times customers say, I've invested so much money in all these good technologies, I don't think I will be breached. But the matter of fact is you wouldn't know for at least 5 months if you're lucky. In most cases, we've seen it's in excess of 2 years, right? In recent times, there was an attack in Vietnam. the airport authority was taken down, Vietnam Air's servers were taken down, and so on and so forth. So it's public knowledge, right? But I mean, in reality, if you look at the details, the hacker was there for a very, very long period of time before he actually did that kind of stuff. Yeah? Typical tools, techniques that they use, of course, DDoS is common. Classic example of DDoS, I'll talk about that later on actually. It is basically denial of service. So if you're a government agency, if you're providing services to the citizen, a DDoS attack would prevent those citizens from accessing those services. But the real risk really comes from credential compromise and malware, right? It basically takes just one machine in your organization. It just takes one user to click on a link or a payload or go to some website and get compromised. And once a machine gets compromised, guess what happens? The hacker moves laterally from one system to the other before he gets hold of domain credentials, right? And then, of course, malware exploits, which will always, in this era of advanced persistent threats, it's actually very easy to navigate through your antivirus solution, right? Because signature-based will only get you so far. So if you look at recent breaches, Ukraine Power, hospitals around the world, as well as transport, even police stations have been taken down by ransomware. They actually ended up paying ransom money. But these are the classic examples, right? The DDoS attack, I wanted to talk about Ukraine Power. So the hackers took down the Ukraine power plants. So power was disrupted, key facility was taken out, and to prevent the users from calling the helpline, they did a DDoS on the helpline, right? So the telephone systems never rang, and because of that, they thought everything was okay, and that basically caused that outage. Of course, we heard of Bangladesh Bank, supposed to be $1 billion. Somebody made a spelling mistake, so it went only to 81. But net, if you look at this, it's all because of credential compromise. Most of the cases in the banks is because of credential compromise, Swift credentials being stolen and then being reused, right? How many of you have got Dropbox or Yahoo accounts? Nobody? A few? Quite a few? Right. So Dropbox announced that 68 million email addresses was stolen in 2012, right? And just recently, about 3 weeks or maybe a month ago, they announced that it also included passwords. So for 4 years, whoever had access to that information basically had access to all the data inside a Dropbox, right? And of course, today or last night, Yahoo also made an announcement saying that 500 million, which is half of the user install base, all the accounts and credentials were basically stolen as well. So that is a risk, obviously, to companies as well. We've talked about this earlier on. Attackers are getting more sophisticated. It's no longer, the 2 minutes of fame that I need to get, but it's all about money, right? They're going after the money, or they're going after intellectual property, or they're going after nations because there's something that they need to get out of that. Yeah? So if you look at a typical chain of attack, right? A user basically clicks on a payload. The hacker will basically start then stealing the user's credentials. The payload gets delivered either through spam, it gets delivered when the user goes to some malicious website, or so on and so forth, right? So it's relatively easy to trick a user today. A lot of times when we travel, how many of you post pictures or check-ins into the hotels and stuff like that when you travel? Nobody? A few? Right? So if, for example, if I'm staying at the Shangri-La, I will say I checked into the Shangri-La, I was here for holiday, I've got pictures and so on and so forth. And a lot of our profiles are not private, right? They're open to people out there. So guess what a hacker can do? He'll say, hey, you went to the Shangri-La, so I will send an email saying that I'm from the Shang, thank you for staying with the Shangri-La, blah, 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 hope your stay was great. I think you left something in your room. Here's a picture of it. And that's how you can get tricked. So they're very smart in terms of social engineering. It's no longer simple spam, like, going to a website to reset your banking accounts and so on and so forth. So these guys will socially engineer in a very creative way. They will track down users and go after them as well. So if an attacker gets into the network, obviously the first thing he wants to do is move laterally to a couple of other machines, get access to a machine that is used by your domain admins, right? And then get access to your domain controllers. And once that happens, it's basically game over, right? How many of you have got the same admin password on all your desktops? Right? That is a big problem, because once I've got one machine compromised, I can move to any machine that I want. Right? How many of you have the same domain admins workstations to do personal work as well as to log on to the domain controllers? Most of us do, right? So, you don't segregate these responsibilities. You don't have, lockdown workstations for specific tasks or jump servers or jump networks, as we call them. That is kind of a bit of a risk to the organization, right? So, if you go to the next slide, what are the things we need to do here, right? First is we want to basically prevent escalation of privileges, right? You want to lock down, you want to be alerted, and you want to be able to restrict the damage before the escalation of privileges happen. The next one is the lateral movement. Yeah? So we want to restrict lateral movement. One of the easiest ways to do is to have randomized passwords on your desktops. Right? There is a tool called Local Admin Password Solution. How many of you know about it? Nobody? It's a free tool on the Microsoft site. It allows you to randomize passwords on your desktops and also allows you to manage admin access into the desktop. So have a look at that as well. And the last one is how is your organization prepared in terms of incident response plan, right? A lot of times we go into situations with customers. They've deployed a lot of stuff in terms of technologies. But they don't have a good detection, and most importantly, they don't have a good response plan. Because when stuff happens, you need to be in control. You need to have a good project management office, because there'll be like a ton of vendors coming to you to say, hey, I'm the best, engage me, kind of stuff, right? So be prepared there as well. And I think one thing we should never forget is the organizational readiness in terms of education for users, right? That is very, very critical. Because no matter what you do, there's some user downstream, not IT savvy, goes and clicks on something. That's the end of the story there. Yeah. So, I mean, in the past, IT environments were pretty closed. You had control of everything. But now, if you look at going forward, if you look at the organizations today, you're connected to basically other vendors, other partners, other organizations, right? So it just takes one person in that whole thing to get compromised, and the rest will be history, because when one machine gets compromised, it will spread into the other systems, and the whole network can come down. And we've seen that with many large organizations, Target being the classic example that everybody talks about, because the air conditioning vendor came in with a laptop that was infected, he plugged it into the network, and that's what happened. Yeah. So from a security posture, we always talk about security in three main areas, right? Protect, detect, and respond, right? Most customers spend a lot of money in the protect. They don't have a good detection strategy, and they don't have a response strategy, right? The bulk of investment today, though you still need protect, I'm not saying you don't need protect, but you need to have focus on being able to detect faster, because when you have an assume breach strategy, you need to think about, how am I thinking like the bad guy? How can I detect him faster? How can I slow his progress in my organization a lot faster as well? Yeah. So focus on the detect and the respond. Yeah. So what is Microsoft doing in this space, right? Early on, we talked about why should you trust Microsoft, right? And I'll talk about some of the stuff that we're doing here. So we're investing heavily on the platform, secure by design, with security built into the platform. Security is very important, but the intelligence that feeds into the security is equally important, right? So we're building a large security intelligence network. We've already had it for ages, but we are now taking that intelligence and making it actionable and putting it back into the products as well, and then working with partners. So if you look at the key areas that's driving investment for us, in terms of security, are these four: identity, devices, apps and data, and infrastructure. So if you look at identity today, identity is the new perimeter, right? Whether the user is inside your organization or outside your organization, you need to be able to challenge the user for authentication based on his presence, based on the type of device he's using, and of course the location. So if he's out of office, you might want to use a second factor of authentication, or maybe a third factor. How are you managing the devices? Are they secured? Are they connected properly to the organization? The apps and the data, right? A lot of applications will, and data will be on-prem, but it's moving to the cloud, right? One is with your knowledge, one maybe without your knowledge. So how are you tracking that? Yeah, shadow IT is a big, big problem. And then, of course, managing the whole infrastructure end to end. If you look at the investments we've made, we've bought about 3 or 4 companies in recent times, most of them from Israel. I'll talk about some of those capabilities that we've incorporated into the platform. But if you want to have a detailed discussion, we can have it later after this session as well. So the first one up there is advanced threat analytics, right? This is a technology that is relatively easy to deploy. It sits on your domain controller in a tap mode. So it's not even on your domain controller, just in a separate box in tap mode. It listens to all user behavior in terms of login, in terms of devices he's connecting from, in terms of his working hours. So it learns as well. So if a user typically works from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and then suddenly they see a different trend that he's logging in from past midnight, and he's using not his traditional devices, but other devices, that's a red flag. Yeah? Apart from that, we also look at threat analysis in terms of, is he using a ticket from somebody else's machine? When you're looking at lateral movement, there are 2 things that happen. You steal tickets, NTLM tickets or Kerberos tickets. It's called pass the hash. And these tickets could be reused by the hacker. So when that happens, we'll flag it out, and we'll tell you, hey, this is a problem in your network, and you need to take a look at it. So it's very non-intrusive for all of you, who want to have a better detection capability. ATA is a very good way to start, because it's just a box that sits in tap mode, and you don't need to install anything on the endpoint side of things. On the Windows side of things, we've made significant enhancements, right? In Windows 10, Device Guard as well as Credential Guard help you to lock down those systems, right? With Device Guard, we can basically whitelist your applications. Only trusted applications will run. So things like ransomware and stuff like that will not execute. Yeah? And with Credential Guard, for those administrators who need to log on to domain controllers, you can basically log on using a virtual session in the Credential Guard in Windows 10. And when you log off, the credentials are never stored on the system, or the hashes are never stored on the system as well. And then if you move towards Office 365 and Azure, there's several enhancements that we've made there. So advanced threat protection in Office 365, where we sandbox emails with attachments that are not known, right? A new file, a new malware that came through, we'll sandbox it, we'll analyze it, and then we'll give a verdict whether that file is okay or not. The other traditional stuff like anti-spam, anti-malware, which I won't spend time on. Let me talk about Azure Security Center really quickly. This basically looks at user behavior again. So if a user logged in from location in Manila, and at the same time he's trying to log on from Singapore, for example, that's physically not possible. So we can raise an alert and notify you. One of the other things we do with Azure Security Center and our intelligence feed is, if you've got machines connecting to Azure, we'll also see whether there's any botnet traffic going from this PC, and we can notify you that, hey, this machine is already been compromised or has some botnet traffic coming into the Microsoft sinkhole. So whatever botnets we've taken down and we bring them to our sinkhole, we can see that traffic still coming out from there. So these are just some of the enhancements we've made with the product itself, right? In the platform. So if you move forward, on Windows 10, from ransomware's perspective, right, if you're looking at some of the key security capabilities, we've talked about that. The Device Guard, which prevents execution of malware and untrusted applications, and that's what essentially ransomware is all about. But Credential Guard is equally important when you're looking at lateral movement across the systems. And then, of course, the device itself, making sure the core boot up engine is secured as well. So these are some of the very important features that we've incorporated into Windows. If you look at your migration strategy into Windows 10, look at this as a top priority, because it will help to save you a lot of headache, right? Especially, you can start first with the admins, and then, of course, start rolling it out to the other end users as well. All right. So where do we get all this intelligence from, right? So intelligence is very key when you're looking at updating security products, right? So if you look at the stuff that we are collecting, we collect data from about 1 billion Windows species, telemetry information. When the malicious software removal tool runs, we collect that. If you look at Office 365 and Hotmail, we're scanning like millions, if not billions, of emails every month, right? So we look at that. And then, so we've got all the visibility that's needed to build the intelligence. We can, run it through our machine learning system that we have that gives us the ability to basically analyze information across multiple vectors and then update the products accordingly as well. So we've got the context, we've got the visibility, but more importantly, I mean, Microsoft IT has been running almost 1 million PCs, servers in our environment, right? Maybe more, right? So we've got all the experience, and we also do cross-platform now, right? So, in the past, Microsoft used to be only Microsoft shop, right? So, but now we love everybody else as well, and we've got that. And from an expertise perspective, we've got about 3,500 security professionals we've invested in, and these are global. This is a global team, and like I said, we invest close to $1 billion in security. That's a lot of money that we spent just on security. And then the partners, we work with partners like Symantec, Kaspersky, law enforcement, certs, and so on and so forth as well. So that helps to make the product better. It helps us to share information with all these vendors. And like we mentioned earlier, we work with law enforcement to also go out and take out botnets as well. So let's see how Microsoft can help, right? You with the active defense side of things, right? So let's just spend the next 5 or 10 minutes talking about 2 areas. One is the advanced threat analytics, and I apologize, the graphics isn't great. So we look at the behavior of the user. So his, what devices he's logging on from, what is the user timings, what kind of services he's accessing, and so on and so forth. And then we also look at detection of advanced attacks. So is this machine compromised? Is this machine using a ticket from another machine, and so on and so forth. And then we basically give you the alert in terms of, this machine is potentially compromised or this user's credentials are stolen, right? So this is a very, very good tool that we use. As I said earlier on, it's very simple to be deployed, and it's very, very effective and gives results almost instantaneously for customers. So I won't talk too much on this. I'll just roll the video.
ATA, or Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, is an on-premises attack detection platform that makes it possible to quickly and accurately detect and alert to threats before they can cause damage. Sounds good, right? So how does it do that? Well, ATA analyzes and learns both user and entity behavior, where entities are things like computers and services, by aggregating data from multiple data sources. This includes things like raw network traffic, Windows events, and even data consumed from popular third-party solutions such as Splunk. So let's go ahead and log on, and we'll take a look at what we like to call the attack timeline. The idea here is to present an almost Facebook-like feed of suspicious activities. Presenting this quantity of data as a timeline gives you the power of perspective as to who's accessing what, when they're accessing it, and how. Now here's an event indicating suspicion of identity theft. So why did we log this? Well, we logged it because it doesn't fall within ATA's understanding of Michael's established normal behaviors, so it's suspicious. We can even see that multiple events were used and correlated to detect it, 4 in this case. But as cool as that is, we also compare Michael's normal behavior with the behavior of other accounts in the organization in order to flag his activity as suspicious when he's not doing the same sort of things that they do. Let's take a look at the list of abnormal computers then that contributed to this alert. I think we'd all agree that it's weird that Michael, a full-time employee, suddenly logs on to the external vendor terminal server, and it's even more weird that he did so outside of his normal working hours, yet another behavioral aspect that ATA tracks. So let's kick off the investigation process by clicking on the external vendor terminal server, which takes us to the profile view, and we then get to see the attack timeline from the terminal server's perspective by clicking on the Suspicious Activities tab. Now, as with many attacks, this one begins with a reconnaissance phase where we see the attacker attempting to guess usernames. Ultimately, they succeeded and guessed 3 user accounts, one of them being Michael's account. In the next phase of the attack, we'll get to clearly see the attacker attempting a brute force attack, concluding in them guessing Michael's password. Now, once Michael's account was compromised, we can see it behaving abnormally, and eventually we see the attacker using a pass the hash attack to move laterally and to elevate their privilege to a domain admin account, possibly their ultimate goal. In this instance, the attack was detected by ATA with the help of data provided by a third-party SIEM solution, Splunk in this case, which was configured to forward Windows security events to ATA. Splunk was already collecting these events, so no additional config was required there beyond the event forwarding itself. Now, all of ATA's detection algorithms are self-learning, allowing it to detect suspicious activities from the first minute it's deployed without the need to configure or tweak rules, baselines, or thresholds. You simply plug it in and off it goes. ATA also has the ability to enrich third-party solutions with the suspicious activities it detects, the you scratch my back, I scratch yours philosophy, I suppose. So if we switch to the Splunk UI, we can see that suspicious activities detected by ATA are being forwarded to and consumed by Splunk. This is hugely valuable because Splunk serves as the primary dashboard for security operations teams in many enterprises today. Now, we're constantly updating and improving ATA with new data sources and detection algorithms, as well as enhancing our integration story with popular third-party services. So if we summarize, ATA uses machine learning and its deterministic detection engine to establish an understanding of the normal patterns of behavior for both users and entities, and it's that unique capability that allows us to provide timely and accurate alerts across a huge variety of attack vectors.
All right, so if you see this, we also integrate with SIEM solutions. In this case, there was Splunk. So we get feeds from Splunk, and we can give feeds back into Splunk as well, and other SIEM solutions. So it's a very good starting point in terms of being able to detect authentication-related and behavior-related security events. So if you move on, the other thing I want to talk about is enterprise threat detection. So this is a service we offer to customers, wherein we look at your enterprise, right? You've got your identities, apps, data, infrastructure. You probably have a SOC in place where you're managing it today with feeds coming in from other sources. And then the enterprise threat detection is a team at Microsoft that will monitor your environment in terms of the infrastructure, the Microsoft infrastructure that you have, and we'll notify you if there are any threats or alerts through phone and via email, right? So how does this actually work? So if you look at the systems that you have in place, you could have Windows 10, Windows XP, or Windows Server, upwards, other systems, and Active Directory. So if you've got Windows 10, great, because Windows 10 has a Defender ATP. Defender ATP is something that we just released. It's basically like a flight recorder in your organization. So if a machine has been compromised, if a file came in, it executed, it modified the registry, and then went to another system, or it's communicating to its C2 servers, all that is recorded with Defender ATP, right? So it's available on the Windows desktop. So this information will go up to the ATP portal that will be available for specific customers, and then you can see the whole picture in your organization with regards to what's happening in the environment. The other one is the Windows logs, right? So when a malware comes into your system, it's always going to trigger events. We'll collect those, we'll analyze that through machine learning, and we'll tell you what's happening in your environment. And the last one is, of course, when you get in the ATA information. If you get an ATA feed coming in, we'll correlate across all of these three areas and tell you like what's happening on those desktops. So we've been in customer situations where they've got great antivirus, great SOCs, great network teams, and so on and so forth, and yet we were able to find about 60 machines that were compromised in a 10,000 user environment. So that is still a risk. Even if one machine is compromised, that's a risk, right? So we can get into those details. We can tell you if there are machines in your organization that are talking outward bound to the botnets, as well as we can tell you what is your risk posture as well. In an incident state, the team will notify you of a threat or an alert. We send a notification. Your team will investigate and will try to resolve it locally. If it is a complex incident, then we also have the option of going on site and doing an incident response as well. So that's what the enterprise threat detection does. It's a very, very effective way to look at your endpoint security posture, because typically when you look at a SIEM and a SOC, you're only collecting critical security events from your servers, your network infrastructure, and maybe your firewalls and a few other devices. Nobody really looks at the endpoint because it's just too heavy to do a SOC for the endpoint. So we give you that other lens. We will integrate into a SOC into a SIEM in the future. Today it's a manual process, but we will have the ability to integrate into that as well. So that's one. The other, okay. So we'll assist with investigation, we'll provide the context, as we said, and we'll help you reduce the organizational risk with enterprise threat detection. And my last slide is around some of the other offerings that we've got. Okay, so I'll just bring out all of this straight out. So, of course, for customers, we look at protect, detect, and respond, and we've got our offerings aligned to that. So from a protect perspective, we'll help you to harden Active Directory, look at your Active Directory security posture, prevent lateral movement. If you're building apps locally, we can give you best practices around securing those apps. But more importantly, the detect and respond are going to be increasingly important. So enterprise threat detection is a key component of that. All organizations do vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. How many of you actually do a hunting exercise for hackers? Anybody does a hunting exercise? No, right? So we offer that as a service. It's a five-day service where 5 guys come down, will scan your network, and will tell you if there are any attackers or compromised risks in your environment as well. And the last one is incident response. We actually got one of the best incident response teams. A lot of the other competition vendors we work with take inputs from us because we are able to analyze the logs and the dumps much better, and we can actually pinpoint what is the problem on those systems as well. So that's in a nutshell what we offer from a security services standpoint. And like I said, when it comes to security, we should always look at it from an assumed breach perspective. Make sure you've got the right people, process, and technologies, and never forget the people side of things. It's increasingly important, right? And always, when you look at assumed breach, make sure you've got a response plan as well, because many organizations we've been into don't have that response plan in place, right? So I'm kind of over time, so I'll be around for some time till tea break, and hope to chat up with you guys there, right? Thank you.